Dr. Michael Anderson had everything a successful man could want. A prestigious position as head of cardiothoracic surgery at Chicago's most elite hospital, a six-figure salary, designer suits, and a penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He also had something else, an arrogance so complete that he judged everyone around him based solely on their appearance and perceived social status. When he encountered a poorly dressed elderly woman in his hospital's lobby one Tuesday afternoon, Michael saw nothing more than an embarrassment to the establishment's reputation. Her faded floral dress and worn shoes offended his refined sensibilities, and he made sure she knew exactly what he thought of people like her. What Michael didn't know was that appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. The woman he so cruelly dismissed as worthless and unsuccessful held more power over his carefully constructed life than he could ever imagine. In just a few weeks, he would discover that sometimes the universe has a peculiar sense of justice, and that the most expensive lessons in humility often come from the most unexpected teachers. This is the story of how one moment of casual cruelty set in motion a chain of events that would either destroy everything Michael had worked for or transform him into the person he was always meant to be. Dr. Michael Anderson adjusted his pristine white coat one final time before stepping into the gleaming lobby of St. Catherine's Medical Center. At 34, he had achieved what many considered the pinnacle of medical success, a position as head of cardiothoracic surgery at one of the most prestigious hospitals in Chicago. His reflection in the polished marble floors showed a man who had everything: designer suits, a luxury watch that cost more than most people's annual salary, and the kind of confidence that came from years of being told he was exceptional. The hospital's interior was a testament to modern medicine's advancement. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed natural light to cascade across Italian marble floors, while abstract art adorned the walls between state-of-the-art medical equipment displays. Michael had worked tirelessly for 15 years to reach this moment, sacrificing relationships, sleep, and sometimes his own well-being to climb the ladder of medical excellence. His journey hadn't been easy. Born to middle-class parents in suburban Ohio, Michael had been an average student until high school, when a near-fatal car accident involving his younger sister sparked his interest in medicine. Watching the surgeons save Sarah's life had ignited a passion that would define the next 2 decades of his existence. He threw himself into his studies with unprecedented dedication, earning a full scholarship to Northwestern University, then completing his medical degree at Harvard with honors. The residency years had been brutal. 18-hour days, constant pressure, and the weight of life and death decisions had shaped him into a formidable surgeon. But somewhere along the way, success had changed him. The praise from colleagues, the respect from peers, and the substantial income had inflated his ego to dangerous proportions. He began to see himself as superior to others, especially those he perceived as less successful or educated. This morning marked his first official day as department head. The previous head, Dr. William Chen, had retired after 30 years of distinguished service, leaving behind shoes that Michael was confident he could fill, and then some. The hospital board had been impressed by his innovative surgical techniques and his ability to handle the most complex cases. His success rate was among the highest in the country, and medical journals frequently published his research. As he walked through the corridors, nurses and residents nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Dr. Anderson," came the choruses of acknowledgement. He basked in the recognition, feeling validated in his belief that he had earned his place at the top of the medical hierarchy. Michael's office was located on the 15th floor, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. The previous occupant had left behind a mahogany desk, leather-bound medical texts, and several awards that Michael planned to replace with his own achievements. He spent the morning reviewing patient files, scheduling surgeries, and meeting with his new team of residents and fellows. By lunchtime, he felt completely in control of his domain. The transition had been seamless, and his confidence soared even higher. He decided to grab lunch at the hospital's upscale cafe, where many of the senior physicians gathered to discuss cases and hospital politics. As he entered the cafe, Michael noticed the usual crowd of distinguished doctors in their expensive suits and designer accessories. These were his people now, the elite of the medical world. He ordered his usual, a gourmet salad and sparkling water, and found a table with Dr. James Peterson, the head of neurosurgery, and Dr. Susan Clark, chief of emergency medicine. "Congratulations on the promotion, Michael," Dr. Peterson said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. "You've certainly earned it." "Thank you," Michael replied, settling into his chair. "I have big plans for the department. We're going to revolutionize cardiac surgery in this city." Dr. Clark smiled knowingly. "I admire your enthusiasm. Just remember, leadership requires more than surgical skill. You'll be dealing with people from all walks of life, patients, families, staff members who come from very different backgrounds than our usual circles," Michael waved dismissively. "I've been dealing with people my entire career. I understand what it takes to maintain standards and ensure excellence." What he didn't say, but what his colleagues had begun to notice, was his increasingly condescending attitude toward anyone he perceived as beneath his status. The cleaning staff, cafeteria workers, and even some nurses had experienced his sharp tongue and dismissive behavior. His success had created a blind spot. He no longer saw people as individuals deserving of respect, but rather as categories to be judged based on appearance, education, and social standing. As lunch concluded, Michael felt a surge of satisfaction. His first day as department head was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea that later that afternoon, his carefully constructed world of superiority and judgment would begin to crumble in the most unexpected way. The afternoon sun streamed through his office windows as he prepared for his next meeting. Little did he know that across town, an elderly woman in modest clothing was reviewing rental applications for a luxury apartment building, including one particular application that had caught her attention. The application of a certain Dr. Michael Anderson, who had impressed her property manager with his credentials and substantial income. The stage was set for a collision between two worlds where assumptions and appearances would prove to be dangerously misleading, and where the true measure of a person's worth would soon be put to the ultimate test. 3 weeks into his new position, Dr. Michael Anderson had fallen into a comfortable routine. His days were filled with complex surgeries, administrative meetings, and the constant validation that came with being recognized as one of the city's premier cardiac surgeons. His reputation continued to grow, and with it, his sense of superiority over those he deemed less accomplished. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Michael was running late for an important consultation with a high-profile patient, the mayor's wife, who required a delicate valve replacement surgery. He had spent extra time that morning ensuring his appearance was impeccable, his hair perfectly styled, his suit pressed to perfection, and his Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. Image was everything in his world, and he never allowed himself to appear anything less than extraordinary. As he hurried through the hospital's main lobby, his phone buzzed with a text from his real estate agent. The luxury downtown apartment he'd been hoping to rent had finally become available. The penthouse unit in the prestigious Meridian Tower boasted floor-to-ceiling windows, a private terrace overlooking the lake, and amenities that matched his elevated status. The rent was substantial, nearly $4,000 a month, but it was a necessary expense for maintaining his image. Michael was so absorbed in reading the details of the lease agreement that he nearly collided with someone near the hospital's main entrance. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption, and saw an elderly woman who appeared to be in her 70s. She was dressed simply in a faded floral dress that had seen better days, worn brown shoes that were scuffed and practical rather than fashionable, and carried a small, weathered purse. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her face bore the lines of age and what appeared to be a hard life. The woman had stumbled slightly when Michael had brushed past her, and she was now steadying herself against a pillar. She looked up at him with kind eyes that seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Oh, excuse me, doctor," she said politely, having noticed his white coat and hospital credentials. "I didn't mean to." "Get in your way." Instead of accepting her gracious apology or offering one of his own, Michael felt a surge of irritation. He was already running late, and now he had to deal with what appeared to be some vagrant who had wandered into the hospital. Her appearance offended his sensibilities. Everything about her seemed to represent the kind of mediocrity and failure that he had spent his entire career rising above. "You need to be more careful," he said curtly, not bothering to hide his disdain. "This is a hospital, not a public shelter. People like you shouldn't be wandering around here without supervision." The elderly woman's eyes widened slightly at his harsh tone, but she maintained her composure. "I'm sorry, I was just visiting a friend who's a patient here. I got a little turned around trying to find the exit." Michael looked her up and down with obvious disgust. Her appearance triggered every prejudice he had developed about people who didn't meet his standards of success and sophistication. In his mind, she represented everything he had worked to distance himself from: poverty, failure, and a lack of ambition. "Maybe you should consider upgrading your wardrobe before visiting respectable establishments," he said with a sneer. "That dress looks like it came from a thrift store, and those shoes are an embarrassment. You're making everyone here uncomfortable with your appearance." The woman's face flushed slightly, but she didn't respond with anger. Instead, she looked at him with what appeared to be disappointment, as if she had expected better from someone in his profession. "I understand you're probably having a difficult day, doctor, but there's no need to be unkind." Her measured response only fueled Michael's arrogance. He interpreted her calm demeanor as weakness, confirming his belief that she was exactly the type of person who allowed life to happen to them rather than taking control and achieving greatness. "Difficult day?" He laughed harshly. "I'm having a fantastic day, actually. I'm a successful cardiac surgeon with a six-figure income, a luxury car, and a penthouse apartment. I don't have difficult days because I made something of myself. Maybe if people like you put half as much effort into improving yourselves as you do making excuses, you wouldn't look like you're shopping at Goodwill." Several hospital staff members had begun to notice the commotion, and Michael could see nurses and orderlies glancing in their direction. He felt a momentary concern about his public image, but his pride had taken control, and he couldn't seem to stop himself from continuing the verbal assault. "Look at you," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're probably living off Social Security, shopping with coupons, and wearing clothes that went out of style decades ago. You have no idea what it takes to be successful, to earn respect, to matter in this world." The elderly woman listened to his tirade with increasing sadness, not for herself, but seemingly for him. When he finally paused for breath, she spoke. Quietly, "Young man, success isn't measured by the price of your clothes or the size of your bank account. True wealth comes from how you treat others, especially those who can do nothing for you." Michael scoffed at what he saw as naive philosophy. That's exactly what unsuccessful people tell themselves to feel better about their failures. The world respects results, not good intentions. As he turned to walk away, feeling satisfied with having put the old woman in her place, he heard her say something that stopped him cold. "I hope you find happiness in that penthouse at Meridian Tower. Dr. Anderson, such a beautiful building deserves residents with beautiful hearts." Michael spun around, shocked that she knew his name and his intended address. But the woman was already walking away, her modest shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. He watched her retreating figure with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. How could she possibly know those details about his life? The encounter left him feeling strangely unsettled, though he couldn't quite articulate why. As he hurried to his consultation, he tried to dismiss the incident as a chance meeting with some eccentric old woman who had somehow overheard his phone conversation, but deep down, something about her knowing smile and her parting words suggested that their paths might cross again sooner than he expected. 2 weeks after the uncomfortable encounter in the hospital lobby, Michael Anderson was finally moving into his dream apartment. The penthouse at Meridian Tower represented everything he had worked for: luxury, status, and the physical elevation, above the common masses that he felt his achievements deserved. As he supervised the professional movers carrying his expensive furniture and artwork into the building, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The Meridian Tower was a 40-story masterpiece of modern architecture, with a doorman, valet parking, and amenities that included a rooftop pool, fitness center, and concierge service. The building attracted the city's elite, successful business people, politicians, celebrities, and other high-earning professionals who appreciated the finer things. In life, Michael knew he belonged here, surrounded by others who had achieved similar levels of success. His penthouse occupied the entire top floor, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. The space was modern and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a gourmet kitchen equipped with professional-grade appliances. The master bedroom featured a walk-in closet larger than most people's bedrooms, and a bathroom with marble surfaces and fixtures imported from Italy. As the movers arranged his furniture under his careful supervision, Michael's phone rang. It was Dr. Peterson from the hospital, calling to congratulate him on a successful surgery they had performed together the previous day. "Michael, I have to say, your technique in that bypass surgery yesterday was impressive," Dr. Peterson said. "The patient's recovery is exceeding all expectations." "Thank you, James. It's all about precision and preparation," Michael replied, walking out onto his private terrace while the movers continued their work. "I've been refining that particular approach for years. Not everyone has the steady hands required for such delicate work." As they discussed the technical aspects of the surgery, Michael noticed an elderly woman walking slowly through the building's elegant lobby far below. Even from his vantage point 40 floors up, something about her gait seemed familiar. She was carrying several shopping bags and appeared to be struggling slightly with their weight. "The key is understanding that not all surgeons are created equal," Michael continued, half distracted by the scene below. "Some people have natural talent, others simply go through the motions. It's the difference between excellence and mediocrity." The woman in the lobby had stopped to rest, setting down her bags and looking around the opulent space with what appeared to be satisfaction rather than intimidation. Michael found himself wondering how someone who appeared to be of modest means had gained access to such an exclusive building. Perhaps she was a cleaning lady or someone's domestic help. After finishing his call, Michael spent the rest of the afternoon arranging his belongings and familiarizing himself with the apartment's high-tech features. The building's concierge had left him a welcome package containing information about the amenities, local services, and a personal note from the building's management company, expressing their pleasure at having such a distinguished new resident. That evening, as Michael stood on his terrace enjoying a glass of expensive wine and admiring his new view, he felt completely vindicated in his life choices. Every sacrifice, every long hour of study, every difficult decision had led to this moment. He was exactly where he deserved to be, living exactly as he had always imagined he would. The next morning, Michael decided to explore the building's amenities before heading to work. He started with the fitness center, which was equipped with state-of-the-art equipment and offered personal training services. The space was immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing natural light and motivational views of the city. As he was finishing his workout, he noticed the same elderly woman from the day before entering the fitness center. She was dressed in simple exercise clothes that appeared to be several years old, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing age-related physical limitations. Michael felt a flash of irritation. How had someone like her gained access to these exclusive facilities? He approached the front desk where a young, well-dressed attendant was working on a computer. "Excuse me," Michael said in his most authoritative tone. "I think there might be some mistake. There's an elderly woman in here who doesn't appear to belong. Are you sure she has proper access to these facilities?" The attendant looked confused. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand. All residents have full access to the fitness center." "Residents?" Michael was genuinely surprised. "That woman is a resident? Are you sure? She doesn't seem like she fits the demographic for this building." The young man looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I can't discuss other residents' information, sir, but I can assure you that everyone in this facility has proper authorization to be here." Michael felt a growing sense of unease. How could someone who appeared to be living on a fixed income afford to live in a building where rent started at $3,000 per month? Perhaps she was subletting from the actual tenant, or maybe she was a relative staying temporarily with one of the legitimate residents. As he gathered his things to leave, Michael noticed the elderly woman was now using one of the elliptical machines, moving at a slow but steady pace while reading what appeared to be a financial newspaper. Something about her profile seemed even more familiar in the better lighting of the fitness center, but he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. On his way out, he stopped by the concierge desk in the lobby, hoping to gather more information about the building's residents without appearing too obvious about his concerns. "Good morning, Dr. Anderson," the concierge said with professional warmth. "How are you settling into your new home?" "Very well, thank you. I have to say, I'm impressed by the quality of the building and its amenities." "I assume the management company is quite selective about tenants?" "Absolutely, sir. We have very strict financial requirements and background checks. The building has maintained its reputation as one of the city's most exclusive residential properties." Michael nodded, still puzzled by the presence of the elderly woman who seemed so out of place among the building's affluent residents. As he walked to his car, he made a mental note to observe more carefully over the coming days. Something about the situation didn't add up, and Michael Anderson was not the type of man to let mysteries go unsolved. Little did he know that he was about to discover just how wrong his assumptions could be and how dangerous it was to judge people based solely on their appearance. Michael's curiosity about his elderly neighbor grew stronger over the following week. He found himself paying closer attention to the building's other residents, trying to understand how someone who appeared to be of such modest means could afford to live in Meridian Tower. His observations revealed a pattern that both confused and frustrated him. Every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, the woman would emerge from the elevator carrying a cup of coffee and what appeared to be financial documents. She would sit in the lobby's comfortable seating area for about 30 minutes, making notes and occasionally taking phone calls that seemed to be business-related. Her conversations, which Michael had begun eavesdropping on during his own trips through the lobby, involved discussions about property maintenance, rental agreements, and financial reports. The mystery deepened when Michael noticed that building staff treated her with unusual deference. The doorman would greet her warmly, by name, though Michael hadn't been able to catch exactly what they called her. The concierge would often approach her with questions and updates, and maintenance workers would stop to chat with her as if she were more than just another tenant. On Thursday morning, Michael decided to take a more direct approach. He had overheard the woman making arrangements to meet with someone called Jim about quarterly reports and rental income projections. This definitely didn't sound like the conversation of someone living on Social Security, as he had assumed during their unpleasant encounter at the hospital. He positioned himself strategically in the lobby's seating area with his laptop, pretending to work on medical research while keeping an eye on the woman's activities. At exactly 9:30, a professionally dressed man in his 50s approached her table, carrying a briefcase and several thick folders. "Good morning, Margaret," the man said as he took a seat across from her. "I have the monthly reports you requested, along with the applications for the vacant units in the Riverside complex." Michael's eyes widened as he realized he was listening to what sounded like a business meeting between a property owner and her manager. The woman, apparently named Margaret, reviewed the documents with the sharp attention of someone deeply familiar with real estate operations. "The vacancy rate is still higher than I'd like in the downtown properties," Margaret said, her voice carrying an authority that Michael hadn't noticed during their previous encounter. "What's our marketing strategy for attracting quality tenants?" Jim, who Michael now understood was some kind of property manager, pulled out a tablet and began showing her graphs and statistics. "We've been focusing on young professionals, particularly those in medicine and law. The demographic research shows they're willing to pay premium rents for luxury amenities and prime locations." Michael nearly choked on his coffee. Not only was this elderly woman discussing real estate investments worth millions of dollars, but she was specifically targeting tenants like him. The irony was almost too much to process. "What about background checks?" Margaret continued. "I want to ensure we're getting tenants who will respect the properties and treat other residents with courtesy and kindness. Financial qualification is important, but character matters more." "Absolutely," Jim agreed. "We've implemented comprehensive screening that includes not just credit and income verification, but also references from previous landlords and employers. We're particularly interested in tenants who demonstrate respect for others and community-minded values." Michael felt a growing sense of dread as he remembered his behavior during their encounter at the hospital. Could this woman possibly be connected to his own rental situation? He tried to remember the name of the management company that had processed his application for the penthouse, but he had dealt primarily with a real estate agent and had paid little attention to the behind-the-scenes details. As the meeting continued, Margaret and Jim discussed specific properties by name. Michael's blood ran cold when he heard Jim mention the Meridian Tower penthouse tenant and something about an interesting application from a cardiac surgeon. "Dr. Anderson seems to meet all our financial requirements," Jim was saying, "though I have to admit I haven't had the opportunity to assess his character personally. His references were excellent, and his income certainly qualifies him for the premium unit." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "I trust your judgment, Jim. You've always been an excellent judge of character. I just hope he turns out to be the kind of person who enhances our community rather than detracts from it." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics that clearly established Margaret as a significant property owner with a portfolio spanning multiple buildings. Throughout the city, Michael's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what he was learning. When the meeting concluded, Jim packed up his materials and shook hands with Margaret before departing. Michael watched as she remained seated, reviewing some of the documents they had discussed. This was his opportunity to learn more, though he wasn't sure exactly how to approach the situation. As Margaret prepared to leave, she glanced in his direction, and their eyes met. For a moment, Michael saw a flicker of recognition in her expression, followed by what appeared to be disappointment. She gathered her things and walked toward the elevator without acknowledging him further. That evening, Michael called his real estate agent, desperate for more information about his rental arrangement. "Hi, this is Dr. Anderson. I have a question about my lease at Meridian Tower. Could you tell me who actually owns the building?" "Let me check my files," the agent replied. "The property is owned by Thompson Real Estate Holdings. It's a private investment company that owns several luxury properties throughout the city. Why do you ask? Just curious about my new neighbors, Michael said, trying to sound casual. Do you know anything about the company's owner? Not much, I'm afraid. It's owned by an elderly woman, but she keeps a low profile. Very successful businesswoman, from what I understand. She's built quite an empire over the past few decades. Michael hung up the phone with a growing sense of unease. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that he desperately didn't want to see. If his suspicions were correct, the woman he had insulted and humiliated at the hospital might be more than just an innocent bystander. She might be the person who literally held the keys to his new life of luxury. Friday morning arrived with an unseasonably cold October wind that rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's penthouse apartment. He had spent a restless night trying to convince himself that his growing suspicions about Margaret were nothing more than paranoid coincidence. Surely the woman he had encountered at the hospital couldn't be the same person who owned his building. The universe wasn't that cruel or poetic in its justice. But deep down, Michael knew he was lying to himself. Every interaction he had observed, every conversation he had overheard, every respectful nod from building staff painted a clear picture that he was desperately trying to ignore. The elderly woman in the faded floral dress wasn't just a resident of Meridian Tower. She was likely its owner, and by extension, his landlord. As he prepared for work, Michael's phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Meridian Towers, management office, and his stomach immediately knotted with anxiety. Dr. Anderson, this is Jim Thompson from the building management office. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Michael replied, trying to keep his voice steady. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know that the building owner would like to schedule a brief meet and greet with our newer residents. It's something she does periodically to ensure everyone is settling in well and to address any concerns. Would you be available this afternoon around 4 o'clock? Michael's mouth went dry. This was it, the moment of truth he had been dreading. Of course, he managed to say. Should I meet you in the lobby? Actually, she'll come up to your apartment, if that's convenient. She likes to see how residents are enjoying their spaces and whether there are any maintenance issues that need attention. After hanging up, Michael spent the remainder of his morning at the hospital in a state of distracted anxiety. His surgical skills were still sharp. Years of training had made certain procedures almost automatic, but his mind kept wandering to the impending meeting with his landlord. If Margaret was indeed the owner of his building, how should he handle the situation? Should he apologize for his behavior at the hospital? Should he pretend not to remember their encounter? Should he try to brazen it out and hope she had forgotten the incident? The afternoon seemed to drag endlessly as Michael anticipated 4 o'clock. He left the hospital early, claiming he had an important appointment, and spent an hour pacing around his apartment, rehearsing various scenarios and potential conversations. None of his mental preparations seemed adequate for the magnitude of his potential mistake. At exactly 4 o'clock, his doorbell rang. Michael took a deep breath, smoothed his tie, and opened the door to find Jim Thompson standing beside the same elderly woman he had insulted so thoroughly at the hospital. She was dressed more formally today, a navy blue business suit that, while not expensive, was well-tailored and professional. Her gray hair was styled neatly, and she carried herself with quiet dignity and confidence. "Dr. Anderson," Jim said, with a warm smile, "I'd like you to meet Margaret Wilson, the owner of Meridian Tower and several other properties throughout the city. Margaret, this is Dr. Anderson, our new penthouse resident." Margaret extended her hand with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Anderson. I hope you're enjoying your new home." Michael shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of decades of hard work. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. The apartment is absolutely beautiful. Please call me Margaret. May we come in? I'd love to see how you've arranged the space." As they entered the apartment, Margaret's experienced eye took in every detail: the expensive furniture, the high-end electronics, the carefully curated artwork that Michael had chosen to project an image of sophisticated success. She nodded approvingly at the overall aesthetic, while Jim made notes on a tablet about the apartment's condition. "You have excellent taste," Margaret said, examining a piece of modern sculpture that had cost Michael more than most people earned in a month. "It's clear you appreciate quality and craftsmanship." The compliment stung, given the contrast with his assessment of her appearance during their previous encounter. Michael felt a growing sense of shame as he remembered his harsh words about her clothing and his assumptions about her circumstances. As they toured the apartment, Jim discussed practical matters, the building's amenities, maintenance procedures, and community guidelines. Margaret listened carefully while occasionally adding her own observations about the property's features and her expectations for residents. "The most important thing to understand about living in Meridian Tower," Margaret explained as they stood, "on the terrace overlooking the city, is that we're not just individual tenants, we're a community. The way we treat each other, the respect we show for our neighbors and staff, the kindness we extend to everyone we encounter, these things matter more than any amenities or luxury features." Michael felt as though she was speaking directly about their hospital encounter, though her tone remained professional, and her words could apply to any residential community. He found himself studying her face, looking for any sign that she recognized him or remembered their previous meeting. "I've found that truly successful people, the ones who find lasting happiness and fulfillment, understand that wealth isn't just about accumulating possessions," Margaret continued. "It's about using whatever resources we have to make the world a little better, a little kinder, a little more compassionate." The irony of receiving a lecture about compassion from the woman he had so callously insulted was almost overwhelming. Michael wanted to say something to acknowledge their previous meeting and apologize for his behavior, but he couldn't find the courage to bring it up in front of Jim. As the tour concluded, Margaret and Jim prepared to leave. At the door, Margaret turned back to face Michael directly. "Dr. Anderson, I understand you work at St. Catherine's Medical Center. That's a wonderful hospital with an excellent reputation. I'm sure you encounter people from all walks of life in your work there." "Yes," Michael replied carefully, "I do. I've always believed that how we treat people, especially those who can do nothing for us, reveals our true character. Don't you agree?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Michael knew with absolute certainty that Margaret remembered their encounter, remembered every cruel word he had spoken, and was giving him an opportunity to demonstrate whether he had learned anything from the experience. "I absolutely agree," he said quietly. "Character is revealed in how we treat others, regardless of their circumstances." Margaret nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I'm glad to hear that. I have a feeling you're going to be a valuable addition to our community, Dr. Anderson." As they left, Michael closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. The full weight of his situation was now crystal clear. He had insulted and humiliated his own landlord, a woman whose goodwill could determine whether he continued living in his dream apartment or found himself looking for new housing. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that Margaret Wilson represented something he had lost sight of in his climb to professional success: the fundamental human decency that should guide all interactions, regardless of social status or economic circumstances. The weekend following Margaret Wilson's visit passed in a blur of anxiety and self-reflection for Michael. He found himself replaying their encounter at the hospital over and over again, cringing at the memory of his cruel words and arrogant behavior. The woman he had dismissed as insignificant and unsuccessful had turned out to be one of the city's most successful real estate investors, and more importantly, someone who clearly valued human dignity over material wealth. Monday morning brought a new determination. Michael decided he needed to learn more about Margaret Wilson and understand exactly who he was dealing with. His first stop was the hospital's research library, where he hoped to find information about local business leaders and philanthropists. What he discovered in newspaper archives and business journals shocked him even more than his initial revelation about Margaret's identity. Mrs. Margaret Wilson wasn't just a successful property owner. She was a self-made millionaire with a remarkable life story that put Michael's own achievements into perspective. According to a Chicago Tribune article from 5 years earlier, Margaret had started with nothing more than a small inheritance from her grandmother and an unwavering work ethic. She had purchased her first property, a rundown apartment building in a transitional neighborhood, in 1983, when she was just 28 years old. Working as a night shift nurse to pay the bills, she had spent her days learning construction skills, managing tenants, and slowly renovating the building unit by unit. The article described how Margaret had reinvested every dollar of profit into acquiring additional properties, always focusing on buildings that others considered too risky or too damaged to be profitable. Her secret was treating every tenant with respect, maintaining properties to high standards, and creating communities where people wanted to live, rather than just places where they had to live. Over 4 decades, Margaret had built Thompson Real estate holdings into a company worth more than $50 million. She owned 37 properties throughout Chicago, ranging from affordable housing complexes to luxury high-rises like Meridian Tower. But what impressed Michael most was learning about her philanthropic activities. The research revealed that Margaret had quietly donated millions of dollars to medical charities, educational programs, and homeless shelters. She had established a scholarship fund for nursing students, funded a free clinic in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, and regularly volunteered at soup kitchens and community centers. Despite her wealth, she continued to live modestly, driving a 10-year-old Honda and shopping at discount stores. A profile in a business magazine described her philosophy. Success isn't about how much you accumulate, it's about how much you contribute. Money is just a tool for making the world better. Michael found several photos of Margaret at charity events, always dressed simply but appropriately, usually standing in the background, while more prominent figures took center stage. In every picture, she appeared genuinely happy to be helping, rather than seeking recognition for her contributions. The most revealing article was a feature story about her volunteer work at St. Catherine's Medical Center, the same hospital where Michael worked. For more than a decade, Margaret had been visiting patients who had no family, reading to children in the pediatric ward, and providing comfort to elderly patients who were facing their final days alone. The article included a quote from the hospital's volunteer coordinator. Margaret Wilson is the kind of person who restores your faith in humanity. She treats every patient like family, regardless of their background or circumstances. Some of our most difficult and demanding patients become calm and cooperative when she's around. She has a gift for seeing the dignity in every human being. Michael felt physically sick as he read these words. The woman he had insulted for her appearance was actually a regular volunteer at his own hospital, someone who dedicated her time and resources to caring for others with no expectation of recognition or reward. While he had been focused on building his career and accumulating status symbols, Margaret had been quietly making a difference in the lives of countless people. The final article he found was the most damaging to his already bruised ego. It was a recent piece about successful women in business, featuring Margaret as an example of someone who had achieved financial success without compromising her values or treating others poorly in the process. Mrs. Wilson attributes her success to treating everyone with kindness and respect, the article stated. She believes that how you treat people who can do nothing for you reveals your true character. In a business world often characterized by cutthroat competition and ego-driven decisions, she has built her empire on the foundation of human decency. Michael closed the laptop and sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his mistake. He had not only insulted a remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to helping others, but he had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person she would naturally despise, someone who judged others based on superficial appearances and treated people poorly because he perceived them as beneath his status. The weight of his discovery settled over him like a heavy blanket. Margaret Wilson embodied everything he claimed to value: success, intelligence, hard work, while also possessing the qualities he had somehow lost along his climb to the top: humility, kindness, and genuine concern for others. That afternoon, Michael walked through the hospital corridors with new eyes. He noticed things he had previously ignored: the way cleaning staff nodded respectfully to him, despite his history of dismissive treatment, the tired faces of nurses working double shifts, the elderly patients sitting alone in waiting rooms with no one to comfort them. For the first time in years, Michael began to see his workplace not as a stage for displaying his superiority, but as a place where human beings in vulnerable moments depended on the compassion and skill of everyone who worked there, not just the doctors with impressive titles and expensive suits. As he prepared to leave work that evening, Michael made a decision that surprised even himself. He stopped by the Volunteer Services office and asked about Margaret Wilson's schedule. The coordinator, clearly pleased by his interest, explained that Margaret typically visited on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, spending time in the geriatric ward and the children's cancer unit. "She's absolutely wonderful," the coordinator gushed. "The patients adore her, and she has this amazing ability to make everyone feel valued and important." "Are you interested in volunteering as well, Dr. Anderson?" Michael realized he had reached a crossroads. He could continue living his life as he had been, successful but increasingly isolated by his own arrogance, or he could use this painful lesson as an opportunity to become the person he should have been all along. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I'd like to learn more about volunteering here." As he walked to his car, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message from the building management office. "Dr. Anderson, Mrs. Wilson has requested a follow-up meeting tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. to discuss community guidelines and expectations. Please confirm your availability. Jim Thompson." Michael stared at the message, understanding that this meeting would likely determine his future at Meridian Tower. Margaret Wilson had given him an opportunity to demonstrate his character, and tomorrow evening would reveal whether he had learned anything from discovering her true identity. Tuesday evening arrived with an autumn storm that matched Michael's inner turmoil. Rain lashed against his penthouse windows as he paced nervously, checking his watch every few minutes. At exactly 6 o'clock, his doorbell rang with the finality of a judge's gavel. Margaret Wilson stood alone at his door this time, without Jim Thompson's buffering presence. She wore a simple gray suit and carried a leather portfolio that suggested this was more than a casual visit. Her expression was serious, but not unkind, like a teacher preparing to deliver a difficult but necessary lesson. "Mrs. Wilson," Michael began, but she held up her hand gently. "May I come in, Dr. Anderson? I think it's time we had an honest conversation." They sat across from each other in Michael's living room, the expensive furniture and artwork suddenly feeling like evidence of his misplaced priorities. Margaret opened her portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper, which she placed on the coffee table between them. "This is your lease agreement," she said simply. "I've been reviewing it, along with everything I know about you as a tenant and as a person." Michael's throat felt dry. "Mrs. Wilson, I think there's something I need to—" "Yes, there is," she interrupted, not harshly, but with quiet authority. "But first, let me tell you what I know. 3 weeks ago, at St. Catherine's Medical Center, you encountered an elderly woman in the lobby. You insulted her appearance, mocked her clothing, and suggested she didn't belong in a respectable establishment. You told her that successful people like yourself don't have difficult days because you've made something of yourself. Do I have the facts correct?" Michael felt his face burning with shame. "Yes, ma'am, you do." Margaret nodded slowly. That woman was me, Dr. Anderson, and I have to tell you, in 43 years of business dealings, 37 years of property ownership, and 15 years of volunteering at that hospital, I have rarely encountered such casual cruelty from someone in a position of trust and authority. The words hit Michael like physical blows. Each sentence stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed self-image, revealing the ugly truth beneath his professional success. I want you to understand something, Margaret continued, her voice remaining calm but firm. I don't care that you insulted me personally. I've been called worse by better people, and I've learned to let such things roll off my back. What concerns me is what your behavior revealed about your character and how you treat people you perceive as powerless or insignificant. She leaned forward slightly, her gray eyes holding his gaze steadily. Dr. Anderson, you are a heart surgeon. People trust you with their lives when they're at their most vulnerable. Families depend on your skill and judgment during the most frightening moments they may ever experience. The way you treat people, all people, matters more than you seem to understand. Michael wanted to defend himself, to explain the pressures of his job or the sacrifices he had made to achieve his position, but every excuse felt hollow in the face of Margaret's quiet dignity and obvious disappointment. "You're right," he said quietly. "There's no excuse for how I behaved. I was cruel and arrogant, and I'm ashamed of myself." Margaret studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine whether his contrition was genuine. "I've done some research of my own, Dr. Anderson. Your surgical skills are exceptional. Your peers speak very highly of your technical abilities and your success rate. Your patients have generally positive things to say about your competence, but several nurses and staff members describe you as condescending and dismissive. Your residents find you intimidating and unapproachable. Your success has come at the cost of basic human decency." Each criticism felt like a scalpel cutting away at Michael's ego, but he realized that Margaret was performing a kind of surgery of her own, removing the infected tissue of his arrogance to see if anything healthy remained underneath. "I know. I've lost sight of what's important," Michael admitted. "Success became more important than being a good person. Status became more important than treating people with respect. I don't even recognize the person I've become." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "The question is, Dr. Anderson, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Michael said honestly. "I want to be better, but I'm not sure I know how anymore." Margaret reached into her portfolio and withdrew several photographs. She placed them on the coffee table, pictures of her visiting patients at the hospital, reading to children, holding the hand of an elderly man who appeared to be dying alone. "This is what I do with my time, Dr. Anderson. Not because I need recognition or because it helps my business, but because I believe we have an obligation to use whatever gifts we have to make other people's lives a little better. Your gift is healing people's bodies. My gift is creating homes where people can live with dignity. Both of our gifts come with responsibilities." She gathered the photos and returned them to her portfolio. "I'm not going to evict you, Dr. Anderson. Not yet. But I am going to give you a choice. You can continue living the way you have been, successful, but isolated, respected for your skills, but not for your character. Or you can use this moment as an opportunity to remember why you became a doctor in the first place." Michael felt tears building in his eyes, emotions he had suppressed for years suddenly rising to the surface. "Why are you giving me a chance? After how I treated you, you would be justified in throwing me out." Margaret smiled for the first time since arriving, and Michael caught a glimpse of the warmth that had made her such a successful businesswoman and beloved volunteer. "Because, Dr. Anderson, I believe in second chances. I believe that good people can lose their way and still find their path back to decency. And because 15 years ago, a young cardiac surgeon named Dr. William Chen saved my husband's life. He treated Robert and me with such kindness and respect during the worst time of our lives that it restored my faith in the medical profession. Dr. Chen is retired now, But I remember what he taught me about doctors, that the best ones heal, more than just bodies. Michael's breath caught. Dr. Chen had been his predecessor as department head, a man renowned not just for his surgical skill but for his compassion and mentorship. The irony that Margaret's faith in doctors came from the man Michael had replaced was almost too much to bear. "I want to be better," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be the kind of doctor Dr. Chen was, the kind of person you deserve as a tenant and neighbor. Will you help me?" Margaret Wilson studied his face for a long moment, then reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. "Dr. Anderson, healing begins with acknowledging the wound. You've taken the first step. Now we'll see if you're strong enough to do the hard work that comes next." The following weeks marked the beginning of the most challenging period in Michael Anderson's adult life. True to her word, Margaret Wilson had given him an opportunity to prove himself, but the path to redemption proved more difficult than any surgery he had ever performed. It started with small changes that felt monumental to someone accustomed to being treated with automatic deference. Michael began greeting every hospital employee by name, from the janitors who cleaned his office to the cafeteria workers who served his lunch. Initially, his efforts felt awkward and forced. Years of dismissive behavior couldn't be undone overnight. But gradually, he began to see people he had previously overlooked as individuals with their own stories, struggles, and contributions to the hospital's mission. The most challenging aspect of his transformation was learning to admit when he was wrong. During a particularly complex surgery, Michael made a technical decision that one of his residents questioned respectfully. The old Michael would have dismissed the concern and asserted his authority. Instead, he stopped the procedure, reviewed the resident's suggestion, and realized the younger doctor was correct. "You're absolutely right, Dr. Martinez," Michael said, in front of the entire surgical team. "Thank you for speaking up. Patient safety is more important than my ego." The moment was small, but significant. The first time many of his colleagues had ever heard him acknowledge a mistake or give credit to someone else's expertise. Margaret had suggested that Michael begin volunteering at the hospital, and after weeks of internal debate, he finally approached the volunteer services coordinator. His first assignment was reading to children in the pediatric cancer ward, a task that initially terrified him more than any surgical procedure. "Dr. Anderson?" A small voice interrupted his nervous page-turning during his first visit. 7-year-old Emma, bald from chemotherapy but with bright, curious eyes, had been listening to him read a story about a brave knight. "Why do you seem so scared? Are you afraid of us?" The question stopped Michael cold. He looked around the room at the children who were facing battles far greater than any he had ever encountered, yet they were welcoming him with open curiosity and kindness. "You know what, Emma? I was scared, but not of you. I was scared that I wouldn't be good at this, that I wouldn't know how to help." "That's silly," Emma replied with the straightforward wisdom of childhood. "You just have to be nice. Being nice isn't hard." Her simple observation became Michael's guiding principle. Being nice, treating others with basic human decency, wasn't complicated or difficult. He had simply forgotten how to do it consistently. As the weeks passed, Michael began to notice changes in how others responded to him. Nurses who had previously approached him with visible tension began to relax in his presence. Residents started asking questions more freely, leading to better learning opportunities and improved patient care. Even his surgical outcomes improved, as the operating room became a more collaborative and less intimidating environment. The most significant change came during a late-night emergency surgery. Michael was operating on a homeless man who had suffered a massive heart attack. The kind of patient he might previously have viewed as less deserving of his full attention. As he worked to repair the damaged tissue, Michael found himself thinking about Margaret's words regarding how we treat people who can do nothing for us. This patient couldn't enhance Michael's reputation or refer wealthy friends to his practice. He had no insurance to generate substantial billing, and his social status wouldn't impress anyone at medical conferences. But as Michael carefully sutured the man's heart, he realized that saving this life was more meaningful than any of his previous high-profile surgeries. When the man survived the surgery and eventually recovered enough to leave the hospital, he sought out Michael to express his gratitude. "Doc, I know I'm nobody special," the man said, his eyes filled with tears. "But you treated me like I mattered, like my life was worth saving. I ain't had many people treat me with that kind of respect." Michael felt a lump in his throat as he realized this was the first time in years that a patient had thanked him not just for his technical skill, but for treating them with dignity and compassion. Word of Michael's transformation began to spread throughout the hospital. Dr. Peterson mentioned during a staff meeting that the cardiac surgery department had become a much more positive and collaborative environment. Patient satisfaction scores improved significantly, with many specifically commenting on Dr. Anderson's bedside manner and genuine concern for their well-being. The change that meant the most to Michael, however, was the gradual rebuilding of his relationship with his younger sister, Sarah. He had been so focused on his career that he had barely maintained contact with his family, viewing their modest lives as reminders of what he had risen above. When he finally called Sarah to apologize for years of neglect and condescension, her response surprised him. "Michael, I've missed my big brother so much," she said through tears. "I've been proud of your success, but I've been worried about the person you were becoming. Mom and Dad talk about you all the time, but they feel like you've grown too important for us." The conversation led to Michael's first visit home in 3 years. Seeing his parents' simple but warm house, sharing dinner around the same table, where he had studied for medical school entrance exams, he remembered the values that had originally motivated him to become a doctor. His parents had sacrificed to support his education, not so he could look down on others, but so he could use his gifts to help people. As Michael drove back to Chicago that Sunday evening, he realized that his penthouse apartment, expensive car, and designer clothes had never brought him the satisfaction he felt from that simple family dinner. He had spent years accumulating symbols of success while losing touch with the relationships and values that actually made life meaningful. Margaret Wilson had given him more than a second chance at keeping his apartment. She had given him an opportunity to rediscover the person he was meant to be. The question now was whether he could sustain these changes and prove that his transformation was genuine rather than simply a performance designed to avoid eviction. The real test would come when the initial novelty of being a better person wore off, and he had to choose between his old patterns of behavior and the harder but more rewarding path of consistent kindness and humility. Michael was beginning to understand that true success wasn't measured by what you accumulated, but by what you contributed to the lives of others. 2 months after his confrontation with Margaret Wilson, Michael Anderson faced his greatest challenge yet. The hospital's board of directors had announced that they were considering him for promotion to chief of surgery, the most prestigious position in the medical center, one that would cement his reputation as one of the city's most successful physicians. The news should have filled him with excitement and pride. Instead, Michael found himself questioning whether he truly deserved such recognition and what kind of leader he would be if appointed to the position. The old Michael would have lobbied aggressively for the promotion, highlighting his surgical statistics and emphasizing his superiority over other candidates. The new Michael wondered if his recent attempts at personal growth were genuine enough to qualify him for such significant responsibility. His internal struggle intensified when he learned that his primary competition for the position was Dr. Sarah Martinez, the resident who had corrected his surgical technique several weeks earlier. Dr. Martinez was younger and less experienced, but she had earned widespread respect for her clinical skills, collaborative approach, and genuine compassion for patients and colleagues. During a private meeting with the hospital's chief administrator, Michael was asked to make his case for the promotion. The administrator, Dr. Rebecca Foster, had known Michael for years and was well aware of both his exceptional surgical abilities and his historically problematic interpersonal relationships. "Michael, there's no question about your technical qualifications," Dr. Foster said directly. "Your surgical outcomes are outstanding, your research contributions are significant, and your experience is extensive. The question the board is grappling with is whether you have the leadership qualities necessary to guide the entire surgical department." "What specific concerns do they have?" Michael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Honestly, your reputation for arrogance and dismissive treatment of staff members. Leadership isn't just about being the best at what you do. It's about bringing out the best in others. The board needs to be convinced that you can create an environment where everyone can thrive and contribute their best work." Michael nodded, understanding that this conversation represented more than just a job interview. It was an assessment of whether his recent changes were substantial enough to overcome years of problematic behavior. "Dr. Foster, I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I haven't had issues with how I've treated people. I've spent the last few months trying to address those problems, but I understand that changing a reputation takes time and consistent action." "What's driving this change, Michael? Because from where I sit, it seems quite recent and potentially convenient given the timing of this promotion opportunity." It was a fair question, and Michael realized that his answer would determine not only whether he received the promotion, but whether he could honestly claim to have genuinely transformed as a person. "Several months ago, I had an encounter that forced me to confront who I had become," Michael said carefully, not wanting to violate Margaret's privacy by sharing details of their relationship. "I realized that professional success without personal integrity is ultimately meaningless. I don't want to be someone who is respected only for technical skills while being disliked as a human being." Dr. Foster listened carefully, then asked the question Michael had been dreading. "If you don't receive this promotion, will you continue these efforts to improve how you treat people, or will you revert to your previous behaviors?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Michael realized that his answer would reveal the true nature of his transformation. Was he changing because he wanted to be a better person, or because he wanted to achieve a specific goal? Dr. Foster, if becoming a better colleague and a more compassionate doctor was just a strategy for getting promoted, then I wouldn't deserve the position anyway. The changes I've been making are about becoming the person I should have been all along, regardless of any professional benefits. That evening, Michael returned to Meridian Tower feeling emotionally drained from the interview. As he waited for the elevator, he encountered Margaret Wilson returning from what appeared to be another volunteer shift at the hospital, based on the volunteer badge still clipped to her simple cardigan. "Good evening, Dr. Anderson," she said warmly. "You look like you've had a long day." "I have," Michael admitted. "I'm being considered for a significant promotion at the hospital, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it." Margaret raised an eyebrow with interest. "That sounds like an opportunity worth celebrating. Why the uncertainty?" As they rode up in the elevator together, Michael found himself sharing his concerns about whether he had truly changed enough to deserve increased responsibility and whether his motives for personal growth were pure enough to sustain long-term transformation. "May I share something with you?" Margaret asked as they reached her floor. "True character isn't revealed by perfection. It's revealed by how we respond when we're tested. The fact that you're questioning your motives and worrying about your worthiness suggests that your growth is more genuine than you think." Her words provided some comfort, but Michael's real test came the following day when he learned that Dr. Martinez had also been interviewed for the position and had apparently made an excellent impression on the board members. Instead of feeling competitive or resentful, Michael surprised himself by seeking out Dr. Martinez to offer his support and encouragement. When he found her in the residence lounge, clearly nervous about the interview process, his first instinct was to help rather than undermine her confidence. "Sarah, I heard you're being considered for the chief of surgery position," he said, taking a seat beside her. "I want you to know that I think you'd be excellent in that role." Dr. Martinez looked shocked by his unexpected support. "Dr. Anderson, I don't know what to say. We're competing for the same position." "We're colleagues first," Michael replied, realizing as he spoke that he genuinely meant it. "The most important thing is that the hospital gets the best possible leader, whether that's you or me or someone else entirely. Your patients love you, the staff respects you, and you have a natural ability to bring out the best in people. Those are exactly the qualities the department needs." The conversation marked a turning point in Michael's understanding of what true leadership meant. It wasn't about being the most skilled or the most accomplished. It was about creating conditions where others could succeed and thrive. As he walked home that evening, Michael realized that regardless of whether he received the promotion, he had already achieved something more valuable: the respect of his colleagues and the satisfaction of knowing he was becoming the kind of person his parents had raised him to be. The old Michael Anderson had been successful but isolated, accomplished but fundamentally unhappy. The new Michael was still a work in progress, but he was building genuine relationships and finding meaning in his work that went beyond personal achievement. Whether or not the hospital board recognized his transformation, Michael knew that Margaret Wilson's challenge had already succeeded in ways that neither of them had anticipated when she first confronted him about his character. He was becoming not just a better doctor, but a better human being, and that was worth more than any promotion or professional recognition. 3 weeks later, Dr. Rebecca Foster called Michael into her office with news about the chief of surgery position. As he sat across from her desk, Michael felt surprisingly calm about whatever decision the board had reached. The anxiety and desperate need for validation that had once driven him had been replaced by a quiet confidence in his own growth and a genuine acceptance of whatever outcome served the hospital best. "Michael, I want to start by saying that your interview and your recent performance have impressed the entire board," Dr. Foster began. "The changes in your department's culture and the feedback we've received from staff and patients have been remarkable." Michael nodded, waiting for what he sensed might be disappointing news delivered with diplomatic kindness. "However," Dr. Foster continued, "the board has decided that Dr. Martinez is the right choice for chief of surgery at this time. Her leadership style and collaborative approach align perfectly with the hospital's current needs and strategic direction." Instead of the crushing disappointment he might have felt a year earlier, Michael found himself genuinely pleased by the decision. "I think the board made an excellent choice. Dr. Martinez will be a fantastic leader." Dr. Foster looked surprised by his reaction. "You seem remarkably accepting of this decision. I have to admit I was prepared for a more heated response." Michael smiled, thinking of how the old version of himself would indeed have reacted, with anger and accusations of unfairness. "A few months ago I might have responded differently, but I've learned that the best outcome isn't always the one that serves my ego. Dr. Martinez will make the department better, and that's what really matters." "Well, I'm glad you feel that way, because the board does want to offer you a different opportunity. We'd like you to head up our new community outreach program, working with underserved populations and developing partnerships with local clinics and charitable organizations. It would involve some administrative responsibilities, but also significant hands-on patient care with people who desperately need high-quality medical attention. The position would have been unthinkable to the old Michael, less prestigious, lower profile, and involving patients who couldn't enhance his reputation or social status. But as Dr. Foster described the opportunity to provide cardiac surgery to people who couldn't otherwise afford it, Michael felt more excited than he had about any professional opportunity in years. "I would be honored to accept that position," he said without hesitation. That evening, Michael knocked on Margaret Wilson's door with a bottle of wine and an invitation to celebrate. When she opened the door, he was struck once again by how her simple appearance concealed such remarkable wisdom and strength. "I brought this to share some news," he said, holding up the wine. "Both good news and interesting news," as they sat. In Margaret's modestly furnished apartment, a stark contrast to his own penthouse, but somehow infinitely more welcoming, Michael shared the day's developments. He described his reaction to not receiving the promotion, his excitement about the community outreach position, and his growing understanding of what truly made work meaningful. "I'm proud of you, Michael," Margaret said, using his first name for the first time since their confrontation months earlier. "It takes real character to find genuine happiness in someone else's success and to choose service over status." "I have you to thank for that," Michael replied. "If you had just evicted me or ignored my behavior, I might never have been forced to confront who I had become." Margaret poured wine for both of them and settled back into her chair. "Michael, can I tell you something that might surprise you? That day at the hospital when you were so cruel, it wasn't the first time someone had treated me that way because of my appearance or assumptions about my circumstances. It probably won't be the last." Michael felt a familiar stab of shame. "I can't imagine how you tolerate that kind of behavior from people." "Because," Margaret said with a gentle smile, "I've learned that people who treat others badly are usually struggling with their own pain, insecurity, or fear. You weren't really attacking me that day. You were revealing your own unhappiness and isolation. I could see the loneliness in your anger." Her insight was both generous and accurate. Michael realized that his arrogant behavior had been a defense mechanism against his own growing sense of emptiness and disconnection from meaningful relationships. "What made you give me a second chance instead of just writing me off as a lost cause?" Margaret laughed softly. "Because I've needed second chances myself. 43 years ago, I was a young, struggling single mother who made plenty of mistakes and poor judgments. People who showed me kindness and patience changed the entire trajectory of my life. Giving second chances isn't just good for the person receiving them. It's good for the soul of the person giving them." As the evening continued, Margaret shared stories from her own journey, the early struggles of building her business while raising a daughter alone, the mistakes she had made and learned from, and the gradual understanding that true success came from lifting others up rather than climbing over them. "The day Robert died," she said, referring to her late husband, "Dr. Chen sat with me for 2 hours, even though he had other patients waiting. He didn't just save Robert's life during those extra months. He showed me what it meant to care for someone's whole family, not just their medical condition. That's when I decided to start volunteering at the hospital." Michael understood that he was being given not just a second chance, but a model for how to live with purpose and compassion. Margaret Wilson had built a fortune, created homes for hundreds of people, and touched countless lives through her volunteer work, not because she was seeking recognition, but because she understood that individual success was meaningless unless it contributed to the well-being of others. 6 months later, Michael's new position had become the most fulfilling work of his career. He spent 3 days a week performing surgery at St. Catherine's and 2 days working at the community clinic. Margaret had helped fund. His patients included homeless individuals, elderly people on fixed incomes, and families struggling to afford basic medical care. The work was challenging in ways that went beyond surgical technique. Many of his patients had complex social and emotional needs that required patience, creativity, and genuine compassion. But Michael discovered that connecting with people who had nothing to offer him except their gratitude and trust was infinitely more rewarding than impressing wealthy patients or medical colleagues. His relationship with Margaret had evolved from landlord and tenant to genuine friendship. They had dinner together once a week, sometimes discussing business matters, sometimes sharing stories about their volunteer work, and often simply enjoying each other's company and perspective on life. "You know," Margaret said during one of their dinners, "you've become exactly the kind of person I hoped you could be when I decided not to evict you. Someone who uses their gifts to make other people's lives better." Michael raised his wine glass in a toast. "And you've become more than just my landlord. You've become the mentor I didn't know I needed, and one of my dearest friends." As they clinked glasses, Michael reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that fateful encounter in the hospital lobby. He was still a successful surgeon, but success now meant something entirely different. He measured his achievements not by his income or status, but by the number of lives he had improved and the relationships he had built along the way. The penthouse apartment that had once represented the pinnacle of his ambitions now felt like simply a comfortable place to live. His true wealth was found in the letters he received from grateful patients, the respect he had earned from colleagues through consistent kindness rather than intimidation, and the deep satisfaction that came from using his skills in service of people who needed help rather than those who could enhance his reputation. Margaret Wilson had taught him that character wasn't revealed by how you treated people who could benefit your career, but by how you treated people who could do nothing for you except appreciate your kindness. She had shown him that true success wasn't about accumulating possessions or achieving status, but about contributing something meaningful to the world and treating every person with dignity and respect. Most importantly, she had demonstrated that it was never too late to change, never too late to choose compassion over arrogance, and never too late to become the person you were meant to be all along. As Michael looked out from his penthouse terrace at the city lights below, he no longer saw a symbol of his superiority over others. Instead, he saw a community of people, all with their own struggles, dreams, and inherent worth, and he felt grateful for the opportunity to be of service to them. The doctor who had once mocked an old lady's appearance had learned the most valuable lesson of his life, that true healing begins with seeing the humanity in every person you encounter, and that the greatest prescription for a meaningful life is a daily dose of kindness, humility, and genuine care for others. Margaret Wilson had given him far more than just a second chance at keeping his apartment. She had given him a second chance at becoming fully human, and that, Michael realized, was worth more than all the professional achievements and material possessions he had ever accumulated.